In rural Iowa, a 72-year-old widow was about to face ultimate family betrayal. What started as a morning visit from her adult children took a shocking turn when they presented fabricated evidence of her mental decline. Margaret Thornfield wasn't your typical farm widow. For 35 years, she'd been the county's sharpest clerk, known for her encyclopedic knowledge of property law. When her children imprisoned her in the basement to steal her inheritance, they had no idea they were walking into a trap. Maggie's calculated response would destroy their greedy schemes completely. What began as elder abuse became the most brilliant legal counterattack in Iowa history. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Morning Herald's anniversary rolled around. I should have known something was wrong. My children hadn't remembered the date in years, yet here they were on my doorstep at 8 o'clock sharp, faces arranged in expressions of forced concern that made my stomach clench with unease. "Morning, Mother," David said, brushing past me into the farmhouse kitchen like he owned the place, which I supposed he thought he did. At 48, my eldest son had developed the particular brand of entitlement that comes from a lifetime of expecting things to fall into his lap. His expensive suit looked out of place in my simple kitchen, all sharp creases and designer labels that screamed desperation louder than wealth. Linda followed behind him, wringing her hands in that nervous way she'd perfected since childhood. My middle daughter had always been the follower, the peacekeeper, the one who bent herself into whatever shape would keep everyone else happy. At 45, she still moved through the world like she was apologizing for taking up space. Bobby brought up the rear, and his presence confirmed my growing suspicion that this wasn't a social call. My youngest son rarely visited unless he needed money, and he certainly never showed up this early unless forced. At 41, he carried himself with the swagger of someone who'd never quite grown out of the playground bully phase. His construction worker build made more intimidating by the permanent scowl he'd worn since adolescence. "We need to talk, Ma," Bobby said, settling his bulk into Harold's old chair at the head of the table without invitation. The sight made my hands shake, not from age, but from pure fury. Harold had been gone 2 years, but that chair was still his in my mind. About what? I kept my voice level, though alarm bells were clanging in my head. Something about their coordinated arrival, their shared expressions of grim determination, felt rehearsed. David pulled out a manila folder thick with papers. "About your safety, Mother. About some concerning incidents we've been hearing about." "Incidents?" I lowered myself into my usual chair, grateful for the solid wood beneath me as the world suddenly felt less stable. Linda leaned forward, her nurse's training evident in the gentle tone she adopted. "Mrs. Henderson called me last week. She was worried about you wandering around the property at night in your nightgown. Said you seemed confused when she asked if you were all right." I blinked, genuinely puzzled. I haven't spoken to Pearl Henderson in months, and I certainly haven't been wandering around at night. "That's exactly what concerns us," David said smoothly, spreading papers across the table like evidence in a trial. "Memory issues often begin with denial. We've done some research." "Research?" The word came out sharper than I intended. Bobby leaned back in Harold's chair, making it creak ominously. "Dave's been talking to some doctors. Says sometimes old people don't realize when they're getting confused." Old people. The casual dismissal in his voice made my jaw tighten. I'd been dealing with legal documents and property records since before he was born. But suddenly I was just another doddering old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own life. David continued his presentation with the smooth confidence of a man used to selling people things they didn't want. "There was also the incident with the stove last month. You left it on all night." "I did no such thing." "Mother," Linda's voice carried the patronizing patience of someone speaking to a child. "I was here. I smelled the gas when I came to check on you." The lie hit me like a physical blow. Linda had visited exactly once in the past month, and she'd stayed for less than an hour. I remembered every detail of that awkward conversation about Emma's college expenses and Linda's hints about needing financial help. But as I looked at their faces, David's calculating calm, Linda's guilt-tinged determination, Bobby's barely concealed eagerness, I realized this wasn't about my safety at all. This was a performance, and I was the unwilling audience. And then there's the financial confusion, David continued, pulling out what looked like bank statements, paying the same bills twice, forgetting others entirely. The checkbook discrepancies. My blood turned to ice. Those weren't my bank statements. The account numbers were wrong. The handwriting wasn't mine. But they looked official enough to fool someone who didn't know better. Where did you get those? We've been monitoring things, Mother, for your own protection. Monitoring. The word settled in my stomach like a stone. How long had they been planning this? How long had they been watching, waiting, fabricating evidence? I tried to stand, but Linda's hand settled on my shoulder with gentle pressure that felt more like restraint than comfort. We know this is hard to hear, but we've found a solution. The basement, Bobby said bluntly, earning sharp looks from his siblings. It's perfect, safe, comfortable. The basement. My basement, in the house Harold and I had built with our own hands 43 years ago. The basement where we'd stored Christmas decorations and Harold's old farming equipment, where the children had played on rainy days when they were small and innocent, and actually loved me. You want to put me in the basement? My voice came, out as a whisper. Just temporarily, David assured me, his lawyer's training evident in how smoothly he delivered the lie. Until we can arrange proper care. Somewhere secure where you can't hurt yourself or wander off. I don't wander off. I'm not confused. Those bank statements aren't even mine. But I could see in their faces that it didn't matter. Truth was irrelevant when fiction served their purposes better. Linda squeezed my shoulder. We've already had it prepared. Clean sheets, your favorite books, a comfortable chair. It's like a little apartment. A little apartment, with no way out, I'd wager. We should go look at it together, David suggested, standing and extending his hand like he was inviting me to dance rather than inspect my prison. I had two choices: go willingly and maintain some dignity, or be carried down fighting and prove their point about my supposed mental instability. After 35 years as a county clerk, I knew when I was outmaneuvered. But I also knew that the best strategies were often born from the worst defeats. I took David's hand and let him help me to my feet, noting how his palm was damp with nervous sweat despite his confident demeanor. Linda flanked my other side, her nursing training, evident in how she monitored my balance and breathing. Bobby led the way, practically bouncing with excitement at finally getting to play jailer. The basement stairs had never seemed so steep or so final. Harold had installed a sturdy railing when we first moved in, knowing we'd grow old in this house. He'd never imagined his children would use it to escort his wife to her own imprisonment. The basement had indeed been transformed, but not into the comfortable apartment Linda had described. It was a cell dressed up with familiar furniture. My reading chair from the living room, some books from my bedroom, a small table with a lamp. But the windows had been boarded up from the outside, and I could see the fresh scratches around the doorframe where new hardware had been installed. See? Linda's voice was too bright, too cheerful. It's not so bad. I walked to the far corner, running my fingers along the familiar stone walls Harold had pointed with such care. Behind a stack of old Christmas decoration boxes, I spotted something that made my heart skip. The old rotary phone Harold had kept down here for farm business, black bakelite, dusty, but intact. I suppose you'll want me to settle in, I said, calmly, not letting them see the spark of hope that phone represented. Just for a little while, David repeated. But his eyes were already calculating, probably figuring out how quickly he could put the farm on the market once I was safely out of the way. They filed back upstairs, Linda casting guilty glances over her shoulder, David checking his expensive watch, Bobby grinning like Christmas morning. The sound of the lock clicking into place echoed through the basement like a gunshot. I stood, very still for a long moment, listening to their footsteps overhead, their voices filtering down through the floorboards. Financial power of attorney should be easy now. Gambling debts won't wait much longer. Emma keeps asking questions. Need to move fast before someone gets suspicious. So there it was. My children, the babies I'd nursed, through fevers, the teenagers I'd bailed out of trouble, the adults I'd helped financially more times than I could count, had locked me in my own basement to steal my farm and my life savings. The betrayal should have broken me, should have left me a sobbing heap in the corner, mourning the loss of the family I thought I had. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the cold, calculating fury that had made me the most efficient county clerk in Iowa's history. I walked over to the old rotary phone and lifted the receiver. The dial tone hummed sweetly in my ear. They'd been too arrogant to think about cutting the phone line to an old extension they'd probably forgotten existed. 43 years in this house, 35 years dealing with property law and estate, planning, 2 years as a widow with nothing but time to think and plan and remember every legal detail I'd ever learned. My children thought they were so clever, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated their mother. I set the receiver back in its cradle and smiled for the first time in weeks. Margaret Thornfield had work to do. Margaret Thornfield's hand remained steady on the old rotary phone for several minutes after that first conversation with Freedom. The dial tone had been sweeter than any symphony. Confirmation that my children's arrogance had left me exactly what I needed. A connection. To the outside world they'd forgotten existed. But connections meant nothing without strategy, and strategy required information. After 43 years in this house and 35 years managing the legal labyrinth of county records, I knew that knowledge was the difference between victory and defeat. I began my assessment the way I'd approached every complex case at the courthouse, methodically, thoroughly, and with the cold precision that had made grown men nervous when they tried to file fraudulent documents in my office. The basement stretched nearly the full length of the house, divided into sections by Harold's careful planning. The main area where they'd placed my living quarters was barely a quarter of the space. Behind those Christmas boxes where I'd found the phone lay decades of accumulated storage. Harold's workshop area, my old office files that I'd brought home when I retired, boxes of legal documents and property records that my children had never bothered to examine. They'd made their first crucial mistake by not searching thoroughly. I moved the boxes aside with the careful movements of someone who understood that broken hips could end more than just bones. They could end plans. Behind the holiday decorations sat Harold's old metal filing cabinet, the one he'd used for farm business records. The lock had been broken for years, a victim of Bobby's teenage curiosity and a crowbar. Inside, I found treasures my children couldn't have imagined. Harold's will, yes, but also the insurance policies they'd never seen. The mineral rights documentation for the 40 acres of bottomland that had tested positive for limestone deposits 3 years ago. Information Harold and I had kept quiet, knowing that patience would make us wealthy. The correspondence with the wind energy company that wanted to lease our ridgeline for turbines, offering annual payments that would dwarf the farm's current income. Most importantly, I found Harold's private notes about our children's financial situations. My husband had been more observant than I'd given him credit for. David's gambling debts were documented going back 5 years, including photocopies of IOU slips Harold had quietly paid off to keep the family name clean. Linda's husband's unemployment, their mounting credit card debt, and the second mortgage they'd taken on their house to pay for Emma's first year of college. Bobby's DUI arrests, his sporadic employment, and the back taxes he owed on the trailer he'd parked on our property without proper permits. Harold had known. He'd seen what I'd refused to acknowledge, that our children viewed us not as parents, to love and respect, but as a bank account to be drained when convenient. I settled into my reading chair with Harold's files spread across the small table, feeling more like myself than I had in months. This was familiar territory: documents to analyze, regulations to interpret, strategies to formulate. Above me, I could hear my jailers moving about the house. Their voices carried through the old floorboards with surprising clarity, and I realized this basement prison came with an unexpected advantage: perfect acoustics for eavesdropping. "Need to move faster than planned," David's voice tight with anxiety. "Called this morning. They want their money by Friday or they're going to the police about the checks." "What checks?" Linda's higher pitch, stress making her voice crack. "The ones I wrote using Mother's account information. They'll say it's fraud." Fraud. My son had committed fraud using my bank account, and now they were using that crime to justify imprisoning me. The audacity was breathtaking. "You said those were just temporary loans," Bobby's voice, confused but not particularly concerned about the ethics involved. "They were supposed to be, but the numbers I gave at the casino. They didn't come through like they should have." I closed my eyes, letting their words wash over me like evidence in a trial. David had been forging checks on my account. That explained the mysterious bank statements he'd shown me this morning. He'd been stealing from me for months, then used his own crimes as proof of my mental incompetence. "How much?" Linda asked. $43,000, give or take." Linda's gasp echoed down to my basement cell. "David, that's Mother's entire savings account." "Was her savings account. Look, it doesn't matter now. Once we have power of attorney and the farm sells, there'll be plenty to cover everything." "But what if someone finds out? What if Emma keeps asking questions?" "Emma's a kid. She'll believe what we tell her. Besides, once Mother's in proper care somewhere, people will understand why we had to take drastic action." Proper care. They were planning to commit me to a facility after they'd stolen everything I owned. The complete picture was becoming clear, and it was even worse than I'd initially suspected. I reached for the yellow legal pad I'd found in Harold's desk drawer and began writing. Date, time, exact quotes. In my years at the courthouse, I'd learned that precise documentation could make or break a case. "What about Morrison?" Bobby asked. "He keeps calling, wants to talk to Mother about some legal stuff." James Morrison, Harold's attorney and one of the few men in this county who'd treated me as an equal rather than someone's wife or mother. If anyone would listen to my story and believe it, it would be Jim. "I've been avoiding his calls," David said, "but he's getting persistent. Mentioned something about updating Mother's will." My pen stopped moving. Harold and I had discussed updating my will just before his death, but we'd never followed through. Jim Morrison was calling about estate planning, which meant he had no idea what my children were doing to me. Yet. "We need to speed this up," David continued. "Get her declared incompetent, get the power of attorney signed, and get the farm on the market. The longer we wait, the more questions people will ask." "But the basement thing," Linda's voice was wavering. "This feels wrong, David. Really wrong. She's our mother." "She's a confused old woman who can't take care of herself," Bobby said with casual cruelty. "Better she's down there safe than wandering around getting hurt." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Safe." Linda repeated the word like she was trying to convince herself. "But what if Emma finds out? She'll never forgive me. Emma doesn't have to know anything until it's over. By then, she'll see we did what was necessary." I listened to my daughter wrestle with her conscience while my sons planned my destruction with the casual efficiency of men discussing livestock. Linda had always been weak-willed, but there was still humanity in her voice. That might be useful. The conversation moved upstairs, their voices fading as they walked toward the kitchen. I heard the back door slam, Bobby leaving, probably back, to his trailer where he could drink away any lingering conscience. A car engine started and faded down the gravel drive, David heading back to town to continue his charade of concerned son managing his mother's affairs. Linda remained, her footsteps pacing overhead in the nervous pattern I'd recognized since her childhood. Guilt was eating at her, and guilt made people unpredictable. I returned to Harold's files, cross-referencing property deeds with insurance policies, noting discrepancies in tax assessments that could be challenged, finding loopholes in estate law that my children couldn't have imagined. Every document told a story, and together they painted a picture of a family farm worth far more than the simple property value my children were calculating. The mineral rights alone were worth more than they planned to steal. The wind lease would provide steady income for decades. The insurance policies had death benefits they didn't know existed. But most valuable of all was the clause Harold had insisted on in our original will, a provision that automatically disinherited any child who committed elder abuse against the surviving parent. Harold had been a farmer, but he'd also been a man who understood human nature. He'd seen what greed could do to families, and he'd protected me the only way he knew how. My children thought they were stealing from a confused old woman. In reality, they were systematically documenting their own disinheritance with every crime they committed. I reached for the rotary phone again, this time with purpose. James Morrison's office number was burned into my memory from decades of property transactions and legal consultations. It was nearly 5 o'clock. He might still be in. The phone rang twice before his familiar voice answered. Morrison Law Office. Jim, it's Maggie Thornfield. Maggie, I've been trying to reach you. Your David keeps saying you're not feeling well, but I wanted to discuss some estate planning matters with you directly. Estate planning. Perfect. I'm afraid David's been overstating my condition, Jim. I'm thinking very clearly, and I believe it's time we had that conversation about updating my will. Of course. Would you like me to come out to the farm? I could drive out tomorrow morning. Actually, Jim, I need to explain something to you first. Something serious. I kept my voice low, listening for footsteps overhead. My children have done something that I believe constitutes elder abuse, and I need legal advice on how to protect myself. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the connection had failed. Finally, Jim's voice came back, tight with concern. Maggie, what's happened? They've locked me in my own basement, Jim. They've forged checks on my account, fabricated evidence of mental incompetence, and they're planning to have me declared unfit so they can steal the farm. Another pause. Are you safe right now? Do you need me to call the police? Not yet. I need to build a case first, and I need your help to do it legally. Can you come tomorrow, but quietly? Park down by the old barn road so they don't see. Your car? Maggie, if what you're telling me is true. It's true, Jim. Every word. And I have documentation to prove it. I could hear him taking notes, the scratch of pen on paper that meant he was treating this as seriously as I needed him to. What time tomorrow? 10 o'clock. They usually leave me alone in the mornings while David handles his business in town. I'll be there. And Maggie, don't do anything dangerous in the meantime. If they suspect you have outside contact, they won't. They think I'm just a confused old woman who doesn't understand what's happening to her. But you're not? No, Jim, I'm not confused at all. I'm Margaret Thornfield, and I'm going to show my children exactly what happens when you steal from someone who spent 35 years learning how to destroy people through proper legal channels. After I hung up the phone, I sat back in my chair and surveyed my basement headquarters. Tomorrow, Jim Morrison would arrive with legal firepower. Tonight, I had work to do. I pulled out a fresh legal pad and began writing my children's destruction, one carefully documented crime at a time. The rotary phone's dial tone hummed like salvation in the basement's morning stillness. Maggie had waited until Bobby's truck rumbled away for his daily coffee run, her fingers trembling as she dialed the number from the business card tucked behind Harold's insurance papers. James Morrison, attorney at law, Harold's oldest friend and the one person who would understand the magnitude of what her children had done. Morrison Law Office, this is James. His familiar, gravelly voice nearly broke her composure. James, this is Maggie Thornfield. Maggie? Good to hear from you. How are you holding up? I'm afraid I'm not well, James. I need your help, and I need you to listen very carefully without interrupting. She chose each word precisely, knowing this conversation would need to withstand legal scrutiny. My children have imprisoned me in the basement of my own home. Silence. Then, Maggie, are you certain? This is a very serious accusation. James, you've known me for 30 years. Does my voice sound confused or incompetent to you? No. You sound like the same sharp woman who caught that forged deed in the Williams case. Then listen. David has gambling debts exceeding $50,000. Linda's husband lost his job. Emma's tuition is due, and Bobby hasn't paid rent in months. They fabricated evidence of my mental decline, locked me in this basement yesterday, and are preparing to liquidate my assets. Jesus Christ, how long? Since yesterday afternoon. I'm calling from Harold's old shop phone. They don't know it exists. She glanced toward the stairs, listening for Bobby's return. James, if we move too quickly, they'll claim I'm paranoid and confused. Linda has nursing credentials. They've been building a case for weeks. What do you want me to do? Build an ironclad case while I gather evidence. Can you investigate their financial situations discreetly? I need proof of motive. David's gambling debts, Linda's unemployment situation, Bobby's unpaid obligations. That'll take time, days, maybe weeks. I have time. What I need is to do this right. These are my children, James. If we give them legal wiggle room, they'll claim I'm a confused old woman turned against her loving family. Elder abuse statutes are specific, Maggie. If we prove intentional isolation and financial exploitation, they lose all inheritance rights. Every penny. Good. There's something else. Harold's mineral rights documentation is down here. Natural gas royalties generating $30,000 annually, currently at over $200,000 in a separate account. The children don't know. It exists. Morrison whistled softly. They have no idea? None. We're talking attempted fraud on a massive scale. The distant sound of Bobby's truck made her heart race. I have to go. I'll call tomorrow, same time if possible. How can I reach you? You can't. And James, if I don't call for 3 days, assume they've escalated. Promise me you'll investigate no matter what story they tell. I promise. Maggie, we're going to get you out of there. She hung up as Bobby's truck door slammed above. Moving quickly, she positioned herself on the bed with a photo album, her heart hammering as heavy footsteps crossed the kitchen. The deadbolt scraped back. Mom, you awake? I'm here. She kept her voice neutral. Bobby's footsteps descended. Halfway. Everything okay? Thought I heard voices. I was looking through photo albums. Sometimes I talk to your father's pictures. Is that allowed? He appeared at the bottom of the stairs, suspicious eyes scanning the basement. Yeah, well, keep it quiet. I got a headache. Guilty consciences tend to interfere with sleep. His face darkened, but he retreated upstairs, returning with a plate of poorly prepared eggs and toast. Linda's coming this afternoon. She wants to talk about making this more comfortable. How thoughtful. Will she bring the power of attorney documents David prepared? 20 minutes later, a car engine announced Linda's early arrival, with a passenger that made Maggie's heart leap. Through the small windows, she glimpsed Emma's familiar figure. Maggie positioned herself near Harold's workbench, where she could hear kitchen conversations while appearing to sort papers. Emma was here, and her 19-year-old granddaughter was studying social work. If anyone would recognize elder abuse signs, it would be Emma. "I just want to see her for a minute, Mom," Emma's clear voice carried down. "I brought those library books she wanted." "Maybe later, honey. She's been very confused lately, and visitors sometimes make it worse." "Confused about what?" "Last week she helped me with my property law paper. She knew more about Iowa statutes than my professor." Maggie smiled grimly. Emma was asking the right questions. "That's exactly what we're worried about," Linda's voice strained. "One day fine, the next day she can't remember anything." "Then shouldn't she see a doctor?" "Mom, if Grandma's having memory problems, why isn't she getting professional help?" The telling silence was broken by Bobby clearing his throat. "We're keeping her comfortable. Family's better than strangers." "Family's better than strangers, but not better than letting her participate in conversations about her own care." Emma's voice carried sharp intelligence. "This is weird, Uncle Bobby. Really weird." Chair legs scraped as Emma apparently moved toward the basement door. This was Maggie's chance. Before Bobby could intercept, Maggie began singing loudly and clearly. "Take Me Home Country Roads," the John Denver song she and Emma had sung during county fair trips. "That's Grandma singing. She sounds fine to me." "She does that sometimes," Bobby said quickly. "The doctor said it's normal for dementia patients to have lucid moments." "What doctor? When did she see a doctor?" Maggie kept singing, emphasizing the chorus about country roads taking her home to where she belonged, her own home, not locked away like a prisoner. "I want to see her. Right now." "Emma, honey, please listen to your mother." "No, Mom. I'm not leaving until I see my grandmother. This whole situation is wrong, and you know it." As the argument escalated above, Maggie felt genuine hope for the first time since this nightmare began. Emma suspected something was seriously wrong, her social work training kicking in with the right questions that could expose everything. Emma was here, Emma was suspicious, and Emma wasn't going to be easily fooled. The battle for her freedom had just gained a crucial ally. Emma's voice carried through the kitchen floor with increasing determination. "I'm not leaving until I see her, Mom. This is insane." Maggie pressed closer to the heating vent, listening as her granddaughter's social work training kicked into high gear. The argument above had been raging for 10 minutes, with Linda growing more desperate and Bobby more aggressive in his attempts to block Emma's access to the basement. "Your grandmother is having a bad day," Linda repeated, her nurse's authority cracking under Emma's relentless questioning. "Sometimes it's better to—" "Mom, stop, just stop." Emma's voice carried the kind of clarity that cut through practiced deception. "I've been studying elder care protocols for 2 years. What you're describing isn't dementia management. It's isolation. Where's the medical documentation? Where's her care plan? Who's her attending physician?" Silence stretched above. Maggie could practically hear Bobby and Linda exchanging panicked glances. "We're handling it as a family," Bobby finally said, his voice carrying barely contained aggression. "By locking her in a basement?" Emma's question landed like a bomb. "Yes, I can see the new deadbolt on that door. I'm not stupid." Maggie's heart soared. Emma had noticed the lock, the one piece of evidence that transformed this from family concern into criminal imprisonment. "Emma, you don't understand the situation," Linda pleaded. "Then explain it, right now, because what I'm seeing looks exactly like the elder abuse cases we study in my criminology classes." The kitchen fell silent except for the nervous drumming of Bobby's fingers on the table, a habit Maggie recognized from his childhood when he was caught in lies. Meanwhile, 30 miles away in his modest downtown office, James Morrison was making phone calls that would systematically destroy the Thornfield children's carefully constructed fiction. His first call had been to Martha Henderson at First National Bank, a woman who'd worked with both him and Harold for over 20 years. "Jim, good to hear from you." Martha's voice carried professional warmth, What can I do for you? I need some discrete information about the Thornfield family accounts, specifically David's situation. Martha's tone shifted to concern. Is Maggie all right? We've been worried since Harold passed. That's what I'm trying to determine. Can you tell me about David's recent banking activity? Oh my, Jim, that boy's in serious trouble. Overdraft fees, bounced checks, and he's been asking about expediting any inheritance processes. Last week he wanted to know about becoming power of attorney for his mother's accounts. Morrison's grip tightened on the phone. What did you tell him? That he'd need proper documentation and Maggie would have to be present to sign. He got quite agitated when I explained the legal requirements. Martha, I need you to flag all the Thornfield accounts for any unusual activity. No withdrawals or changes without direct contact with Maggie herself. Consider it done. Jim, what's really going on? Morrison chose his words carefully. Let's just say I'm concerned about Maggie's welfare and leave it at that for now. His second call was to the county courthouse, where his connections ran deep after 40 years of practice. Within an hour, he'd confirmed Linda's husband Tom's unemployment claim, Bobby's unpaid property taxes, and most damaging of all, David's recent bankruptcy filing, hidden from his family but a matter of public record. But it was his third call that provided the smoking gun. Dr. Patricia Williams at the Regional Medical Center had been Harold's physician and knew the family well. Jim, I haven't seen Maggie since Harold's funeral. Is she having health problems? That's what I'm trying to determine. Have any of her children contacted you about cognitive decline or requested medical evaluations? Absolutely not. And I'd be very surprised if they had legitimate concerns. When I saw Maggie at the pharmacy last month, she was sharp as ever. We discussed her volunteer work at the library, and she was helping Mrs. Patterson with some complex genealogy research. Morrison made careful notes. No medical consultation, no professional evaluation, no documentation of the mental decline the children claimed was serious enough to require imprisonment. Back at the farm, Emma's interrogation was reaching a crescendo. Mom, I'm calling Adult Protective Services if you don't let me see Grandma right now. Emma, please. Linda's voice cracked. No, this conversation is over. Emma's footsteps moved decisively toward the basement door. Grandma? It's Emma. Are you okay down there? Maggie positioned herself at the bottom of the stairs. Emma, sweetheart, I'm fine, but I'd very much like to see you. Bobby's heavy footsteps interceded. She's not dressed for visitors. Then I'll wait while she gets dressed. Emma's voice carried the steely determination of someone who'd inherited Maggie's backbone. I have all day. The argument that followed was swift and ugly. Bobby grabbed Emma's arm to physically prevent her from opening the basement door. Emma pulled away and immediately pulled out her phone. What are you doing? Linda demanded. Calling 911. Uncle Bobby just assaulted me to prevent me from seeing my grandmother, who's apparently locked in a basement. Emma's fingers moved quickly across her phone screen. This stops right now. Emma, wait! Linda lunged for the phone, but Emma had already stepped back. Yes, I need to report suspected elder abuse and false imprisonment, Emma said into her phone, her voice steady and professional. My grandmother appears to be locked in a basement against her will by family members who claim she's mentally incompetent, but have no medical documentation. Bobby's face went white. Hang up that phone. The address is 4847 County Road 18, rural Keokuk County. The victim is Margaret Thornfield, age 72. Linda began crying. Emma, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, Mom. I understand that you've helped imprison your own mother for money. Emma's voice carried deep disappointment and growing anger. The question is whether you're going to make this right or whether you're going to be arrested alongside Uncle Bobby and Uncle David. As Emma provided additional details to the 911 dispatcher, Maggie smiled for the first time in 2 days. Her granddaughter hadn't just recognized the abuse, she'd taken immediate, decisive action to stop it. Within hours, Adult Protective Services would be knocking on the door with law enforcement backup. Morrison's financial investigation would provide the motive evidence, and Emma's testimony would corroborate everything Maggie had told the attorney. The web was tightening around her children, and they were finally beginning to understand they'd trapped themselves in something far more dangerous than they'd anticipated. The sound of sirens in the distance announced that their time was running out. The sirens grew louder, and Maggie could hear Emma's clear voice continuing to provide information to the 911 dispatcher. Above her, panic was setting in as Bobby and Linda realized their carefully constructed plan was crumbling in real time. "You have to make her stop," Bobby hissed at Linda, his construction worker's hands clenching into fists. "Call David. Tell him to get over here now." "Emma, please," Linda begged, her nursing uniform wrinkled from stress. "Just hang up the phone. We can work this out as a family." "Family?" Emma's voice carried bitter disappointment. "Mom, you locked your own mother in a basement. There's no working this out anymore." Through the heating vent, Maggie listened as her granddaughter continued speaking to the emergency dispatcher. "Yes, I can hear her voice from the basement, but there's a new deadbolt lock preventing access. The family members present are claiming she's mentally incompetent, but they have no medical documentation and are refusing to allow me to see her." Bobby's patience snapped. "Give me that phone!" His heavy footsteps moved aggressively toward Emma. "Uncle Bobby, back off." Emma's voice carried warning. "I already told the dispatcher that family members are becoming hostile. Every word you're saying is being recorded." The sirens were close now, maybe 2 miles out on the county road. Maggie positioned herself at the bottom of the stairs, ready to call out the moment law enforcement arrived. Her heart hammered with anticipation and something that might have been vindication. Linda's sobbing filled the kitchen. "Emma, you don't understand. Your grandmother. She's been forgetting things, getting confused. We were trying to protect her." Protect her by imprisoning her? Emma's social work training was evident in every word. "Mom, I've studied elder abuse protocols. What you're describing is called false medical pretenses for financial exploitation. It's a felony." "Jesus Christ," Bobby muttered, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. "This is all going to hell." The first patrol car pulled into the driveway, its lights flashing red and blue through the basement windows. Maggie felt tears of relief streaming down her cheeks as she heard car doors slamming and authoritative voices approaching the house. Keokuk County Sheriff's Department were responding to a welfare check and possible elder abuse report. Emma's voice carried through the door. "Officers, I'm Emma Caldwell. I made the call. My grandmother, Margaret Thornfield, is being held in the basement against her will by family members." Bobby opened the door, his face a mask of forced calm. "Officers, there's been a misunderstanding. My mother has dementia, and we're caring for her here at home. Sir, we need to speak with Mrs. Thornfield directly." The deputy's voice was professional but firm. "Where is she now?" "She's resting downstairs, but she's having a difficult day. Visitors tend to agitate her condition." Maggie had heard enough. "Officers," she called from the basement stairs, her voice carrying clearly through the house. "I'm Margaret Thornfield, and I'm being held prisoner in my own basement. These people are not my caretakers, they're my jailers." The silence that followed was deafening. Then the deputy's voice cut through the tension. "Ma'am, we're coming down to speak with you. Sir, step away from that door." "You can't just—" Bobby began. "Sir, we have a report of false imprisonment and elder abuse. Step away from the door now, or you'll be arrested for obstruction." The deadbolt scraped back, and Maggie heard footsteps descending the wooden stairs. 2 deputies appeared, a middle-aged man with sergeant's stripes and a younger woman whose alert eyes took in every detail of the basement setup. "Mrs. Thornfield? I'm Sergeant Martinez, and this is Deputy Chen. Are you injured or in immediate danger?" "I'm not physically injured, but I've been locked in this basement since yesterday afternoon by my 3 adult children. They claim I'm mentally incompetent, but as you can hear, I'm perfectly lucid." The female deputy was already examining the door, noting the new deadbolt installation. "Ma'am, are you being held here against your will?" "Absolutely. They fabricated evidence of mental decline, presented it as a family intervention, then physically escorted me down here and locked the door. I've been imprisoned in my own home." Sergeant Martinez spoke into his radio. "Dispatch, we're going to need Adult Protective Services on scene and contact the Detective Division. We've got a potential elder abuse situation that's going to require full investigation." Deputy Chen was taking photographs of the basement setup, the lock, and the living conditions. "Mrs. Thornfield, have you been provided adequate food, water, and bathroom facilities?" "Barely adequate. 1 meal yesterday, a poor breakfast this morning. But Sergeant, this isn't about the conditions. It's about the fact that I'm being held prisoner while my children attempt to gain control of my assets." Emma's voice carried down the stairs. "Officers, my grandmother has been the county clerk for 35 years. She's one of the sharpest people I know. There's no way she needs this kind of care." Linda's sobs grew louder. "We were trying to help her. She's been forgetting things, having accidents." "Ma'am," Sergeant Martinez called up the stairs, "we're going to need to speak with everyone involved, separately." As Maggie climbed the basement stairs for the first time in over 24 hours, supported by Deputy Chen's steady hand, she felt sunlight on her face through the kitchen windows. The simple sensation of moving freely through her own home felt like a miracle. Bobby stood in the corner, his face sullen and defiant. Linda sat at the kitchen table, tears streaming down her cheeks as she stared at her hands. Emma stood near the window, her phone still recording everything. "Mrs. Thornfield," Sergeant Martinez said gently, "we're going to have a medical professional evaluate you to document your mental state. Is that acceptable?" "Absolutely. I welcome any medical or psychiatric evaluation." Maggie's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to legal proceedings. "I think you'll find I'm considerably more competent than my children would have you believe." A second patrol car arrived, followed by an Adult Protective Services vehicle. Through the window, Maggie could see more official vehicles turning into her driveway. The investigation was expanding rapidly. Deputy Chen approached Bobby. "Sir, I need you to step outside. You're under arrest for false imprisonment and elder abuse." "What? This is bullshit. She's my mother and she needs care? You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As Bobby was handcuffed and led outside, Linda looked up at Emma with desperate eyes. "Emma, please, tell them we were trying to help her." Emma's voice was steady but sad. "Mom, I can't lie for you. Not about this." Maggie sat in her own kitchen chair for the first time in over a day, watching as the legal system she'd served for decades began processing her children as criminals. It should have felt like victory, but mostly, it felt like the final, irreversible breaking of something that had taken 72 years to build. Her phone rang, the kitchen landline. Sergeant Martinez answered it. "Thornfield Residence. This is Attorney James Morrison. I represent Mrs. Margaret Thornfield. I believe you have a situation there that requires legal counsel." Maggie smiled through her exhaustion. Morrison had kept his word. The cavalry wasn't just arriving, it was already here, armed with legal briefs and 40 years of courtroom experience. The war was over. Now came the reckoning. Sarah Chen arrived at the Thornfield farm 20 minutes behind the patrol cars, her trained eyes immediately cataloging the scene as she stepped out of her Adult Protective Services vehicle. The flashing lights, the handcuffed man being loaded into a patrol car, and the obvious family drama playing out on the front porch told her this was going to be more complex than a standard welfare check. At 38, Sarah had investigated hundreds of elder abuse cases during her transition. From police detective to social work, She'd learned to read situations quickly, to spot the telltale signs of manipulation and coercion that family members used to mask their exploitation of vulnerable adults. But as she approached the farmhouse, something about this case felt different, more calculated, more desperate. "Ms. Chen?" Sergeant Martinez met her at the door. "We've got Margaret Thornfield, 72, apparently held in the basement by her adult children for over 24 hours. She's lucid and coherent, claiming they fabricated evidence of mental decline to justify the imprisonment." Sarah nodded, pulling out her case file. "What's the family's story?" "The son we just arrested claims she has dementia and they were providing home care. The daughter is crying and not making much sense. But there's a granddaughter here who called it in, Emma Caldwell, social work student. She's been asking all the right questions." Through the kitchen window, Sarah could see an elderly woman sitting at the table, her posture straight and alert, speaking calmly with Deputy Chen. Despite having been imprisoned for over a day, Margaret Thornfield projected an aura of dignity and sharp intelligence that contradicted any claims of mental incompetence. "I'll need to interview Mrs. Thornfield privately," Sarah said. "And I want to see the basement setup before anything gets disturbed." The basement told its own story. Sarah noted the hastily installed deadbolt on the outside of the door, the minimal provisions for extended stay, and most tellingly, the organized stacks of legal documents near an old workbench. This wasn't the chaotic environment of someone with dementia. It was the methodical workspace of someone conducting research. "Mrs. Thornfield," Sarah said as she returned to the kitchen, "I'm Sarah Chen from Adult Protective Services. I'd like to speak with you privately about your situation." "Of course, though I should mention that my attorney, James Morrison, is on his way. He's been investigating this situation since I contacted him yesterday." Sarah's eyebrows rose. A client who had maintained outside legal counsel during their imprisonment was unusual. "You were able to contact an attorney?" "I found an old phone line in the basement that my children didn't know existed. I've been building a case against them for financial exploitation and elder abuse." The clinical detachment Sarah maintained during investigations cracked slightly. Most elder abuse victims were confused, frightened, and often partially complicit in their own isolation. Margaret Thornfield was treating this like a legal strategy session. "Mrs. Thornfield, I need to ask you some standard questions to assess your mental state and living situation. When is your birthday?" "March 15th, 1953. I'm 72 years old. I was the county clerk for 35 years before retiring, and I've lived in this house for 43 years. My husband, Harold, died 2 years ago from complications of diabetes, and I've been managing the farm's financial affairs independently since then." Sarah continued through her standard assessment questions: current events, mathematical calculations, memory recall, judgment scenarios. Margaret's responses were not only correct, but demonstrated the kind of detailed knowledge that came from decades of professional experience. "Ma'am, can you tell me about the events that led to your confinement in the basement?" Margaret's account was precise and chronological. She described the fabricated evidence, the coordinated timing of her children's arrival, the specific financial pressures each child was facing, and the methodical way they had trapped her in the basement. "Mrs. Thornfield, these are serious allegations. Do you have any evidence to support your claims about your children's financial motives?" "Extensive evidence. Would you like to see David's bankruptcy filing, Linda's husband's unemployment documentation, Bobby's unpaid property taxes? I spent yesterday evening reviewing documents my late husband kept in his workshop." Sarah stared at the elderly woman across the table. "You researched your children's financial records while imprisoned in the basement?" "I'm a retired county clerk, Ms. Chen. Research is what I do. Harold always said that knowledge is the best weapon against people trying to take advantage of you." A knock at the door interrupted them. James Morrison arrived with the authoritative presence of a man who'd spent 4 decades in courtrooms. He was followed by Dr. Patricia Williams, whom he'd contacted to provide an independent medical evaluation. Sarah Chen, APS. Sarah introduced herself. You're Mrs. Thornfield's attorney? I am. And I believe you'll find that my client has been the victim of a conspiracy to commit elder abuse, false imprisonment, and attempted financial fraud. Morrison set his briefcase on the kitchen table. I have documentation of the children's financial desperation, evidence of their coordination in fabricating Mrs. Thornfield's mental decline, and proof that they've been planning this for weeks. Dr. Williams began her examination of Margaret, testing cognitive function, physical health, and mental acuity. After 30 minutes, she pulled Sarah aside. Ms. Chen, this woman is in excellent mental health. Her cognitive function is well above average for her age group. There's absolutely no medical justification for the kind of restrictive care her children claimed was necessary. Sarah nodded, her case assessment crystallizing. Dr. Williams, in your professional opinion, was Mrs. Thornfield capable of making her own decisions about her living situation and medical care? Absolutely. She's more mentally acute than most people half her age. Meanwhile, Morrison was presenting Sarah with a folder of documents. Bank records showing David's gambling debts, unemployment claims for Linda's husband, tax delinquency notices for Bobby. Each of them had immediate, pressing financial needs that could be solved by gaining control of Mrs. Thornfield's assets. Sarah reviewed the paperwork, her detective instincts recognizing the pattern. This shows clear motive for financial exploitation. What about the fabricated evidence they presented to justify the imprisonment? Margaret spoke up from her chair. I photographed the staged kitchen mess they claimed showed my confusion. The expired milk they left on the counter. The deliberately burned pot they said proved I was a danger to myself. It was all theater, Ms. Chen. You photographed it? With the old Polaroid camera Harold kept in the basement. The pictures are with my other evidence downstairs. Sarah had investigated thousands of cases, but she'd never encountered a victim who had systematically documented their own abuse while it was happening. Margaret Thornfield hadn't just survived her imprisonment, she'd turned it into a legal war room. Mrs. Thornfield, what outcome are you seeking from this investigation? Margaret's voice carried the cold precision of someone who'd spent decades enforcing legal consequences. I want my children prosecuted to the full extent of the law. I want them held accountable for elder abuse, false imprisonment, and attempted fraud. And I want it clearly documented that any claims of my mental incompetence are fabricated lies designed to facilitate theft. Emma, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, finally spoke. Grandma, what about forgiveness? What about family? Margaret looked at her granddaughter with sad but determined eyes. Emma, forgiveness is for mistakes and misunderstandings. What your mother and uncles did was a calculated betrayal designed to steal my freedom, my dignity, and my life's work. Some actions have consequences that can't be forgiven away. Sarah closed her case file, her assessment complete. Mrs. Thornfield, based on my investigation, I'm finding no evidence of mental incapacity or need for protective custody. However, I am finding clear evidence of elder abuse, false imprisonment, and financial exploitation by family members. She turned to Morrison. What's the next step legally? Full prosecution. I'll be filing civil suits for damages, and I'll be working with the prosecutor's office to ensure criminal charges are pursued aggressively. Morrison's voice carried quiet satisfaction. Mrs. Thornfield's children made the mistake of targeting someone who knows the law better than they do. As Sarah prepared her official report, she reflected on the irony of the case. The Thornfield children had imprisoned their mother to exploit her perceived weakness and vulnerability. Instead, they'd given her the time and motivation to systematically destroy them using the very legal knowledge they'd underestimated. Margaret Thornfield hadn't just survived her imprisonment, she'd weaponized it. The investigation was complete. Now came justice. David Thornfield's hands shook as he disconnected the call from Linda, who was sobbing incoherently about police, arrests, and everything falling apart. Bobby was in county lockup, charged with elder abuse and false imprisonment. The family's carefully orchestrated plan had collapsed in spectacular fashion, and David could feel his world crumbling around him. His phone buzzed with another call from his bookie, the third one today. $53,000 in gambling debts, with interest compounding daily. The kind of people who broke kneecaps when payments were late. He pulled into the farm's driveway to find it crawling with official vehicles. Sarah Chen was loading boxes of evidence into her APS van, while Morrison stood on the front porch, his briefcase in hand and a satisfied expression on his weathered face. David Thornfield? Sergeant Martinez approached as David stepped out of his car. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit elder abuse, false imprisonment, and attempted financial fraud. Wait, you don't understand. But the handcuffs were already clicking shut around his wrists. Inside the house, Linda sat at the kitchen table across from her mother, tears streaming down her face. Mom, I'm so sorry. I never wanted it to go this far. Maggie studied her middle daughter with the cold assessment of someone evaluating a legal document. Linda, you're a trained nurse. You fabricated medical evidence to support my imprisonment. This wasn't something that went too far. This was calculated fraud. David said you were getting confused, that we needed to act quickly before you made bad financial decisions. He said it was temporary, just until we could get proper medical evaluations. And you believed him? Despite 35 years of evidence that I'm more legally competent than all three of you combined? Emma sat in the corner watching her, family implode with the horrified fascination of someone witnessing a car accident. Mom, how could you do this to Grandma? Linda's voice cracked. Emma's college tuition is due next month. Tom's been unemployed for 6 months. David said the farm was worth enough to solve everyone's problems, and that Mom would be better off in professional care anyway. Morrison looked up from his paperwork. Mrs. Caldwell, you do understand that elder abuse convictions carry mandatory prison sentences in Iowa, and that your nursing license will be permanently revoked? The color drained from Linda's face. Prison? But I was trying to help. You were trying to help yourself to your mother's assets, Morrison interrupted. The financial documentation is quite clear about everyone's motives. Sarah Chen entered with her final case report. Mrs. Thornfield, I'm recommending immediate prosecution for all three of your children. The evidence of premeditation and financial exploitation is overwhelming. Maggie nodded. What about my estate planning? I assume this situation affects their inheritance rights. Under Iowa's elder abuse statutes, conviction automatically disqualifies them from any inheritance. Additionally, I've prepared new documents reflecting your wishes regarding Emma's education and any potential rehabilitation for Linda. Emma looked up sharply. Grandma? You're the only one who acted with integrity, Emma. The farm's proceeds will establish a trust for your education and future. As for your mother, Maggie's voice softened slightly. If she pleads guilty, accepts responsibility, and completes court-mandated counseling, she might eventually earn back some consideration. But David and Bobby chose their path when they decided I was worth more to them dead than alive. Through the window, they watched David being loaded into a patrol car, his face pale with the realization that his gambling debts would now be the least of his problems. Linda stood slowly, her hands shaking. Mom, I know you can't forgive me, but please don't let this destroy Emma's relationship with family. Maggie's expression remained stern. That depends entirely on whether Emma chooses to associate with people who imprison elderly women for money. As the official vehicles departed, leaving behind only the evidence of shattered family bonds, Maggie sat in her kitchen, finally free in her own home, but surrounded by the wreckage of everything she'd built over 7 decades. Justice was coming, but the cost would be measured in more than money. 3 weeks after her liberation from the basement, Margaret Thornfield sat in the Keokuk County courtroom wearing her best navy suit, the one she'd worn to Harold's funeral and every important legal proceeding since. Today, the final pieces of her children's prosecution would fall into place, along with the civil suits that would strip them of any claim to her life's work. Judge Patricia Hawkins presided over the packed courtroom with the stern authority of someone who'd seen enough family betrayals to last several lifetimes. The media attention had been intense. Local woman imprisoned by children for inheritance had made headlines across Iowa and beyond. The state of Iowa versus David Thornfield, Linda Caldwell, and Robert Thornfield, the clerk announced. Elder, abuse in the first degree, false imprisonment, conspiracy to commit fraud. Morrison sat beside Maggie at the plaintiff's table, his briefcase organized with military precision. Across the aisle, 3 separate defense attorneys represented her children, their expressions grim as they faced the overwhelming evidence Morrison had assembled. David entered first in orange jail coveralls, his gambling debts having landed. Him in protective custody after his bookie's associates had made threats. The confident businessman who'd orchestrated this conspiracy looked haggard and broken, his hands shaking as he took his seat. Bobby followed, his construction workers, swagger replaced by the shuffling gait of someone who'd spent 3 weeks in county lockup. The other inmates hadn't been kind to someone imprisoned for abusing his elderly mother. Linda was last, released on bond, but required to wear an ankle monitor. Her nursing license had been suspended pending the outcome of the trial, and her marriage was dissolving as Tom faced his own financial pressures without Linda's income. Your Honor, the prosecutor began, the evidence will show that these defendants engaged in a calculated conspiracy to imprison their 72-year-old mother, fabricate evidence of mental decline, and systematically steal her assets through fraudulent claims of incompetency. Morrison had spent weeks building an ironclad case. Bank records documented David's gambling addiction and $53,000 in debts. Employment records showed Tom Caldwell's unemployment and the family's mounting bills. Tax documents revealed Bobby's delinquent obligations and his assumption that he'd inherit the farm. The defendants installed a deadbolt lock to imprison Mrs. Thornfield in her own basement, the prosecutor continued. They staged photographs to suggest mental decline, prepared false medical assessments, and began proceedings to gain power of attorney over her substantial assets. Dr. Patricia Williams testified about Maggie's excellent mental health. There was absolutely no medical justification for the restrictions imposed on Mrs. Thornfield. Her cognitive function tested well above average for her age group. Emma took the witness stand with visible reluctance, her social work training evident in her precise testimony. I knew immediately something was wrong when they wouldn't let me see my grandmother. The isolation, the fabricated explanations, the new lock on the basement door. It matched every elder abuse pattern we study in my program. Sarah Chen's testimony was devastating in its clinical precision. In 15 years of investigating elder abuse, I've never seen such clear evidence of premeditation and financial motivation. The defendants had systematically planned Mrs. Thornfield's imprisonment while researching the value of her assets. But it was Maggie's own testimony that sealed their fate. Taking the witness stand with the composure of someone who'd spent decades in courtrooms, she methodically destroyed every aspect of her children's defense. They claimed I was confused and forgetful, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. Yet I was able to research their financial situations, contact legal counsel, document my imprisonment, and build a comprehensive case against them, all while locked in a basement. She produced the Polaroid photographs she'd taken of their staged evidence. They left expired milk on my counter and photographed it as proof of my confusion. They burned a pot deliberately and claimed it showed I was dangerous. They fabricated every piece of evidence used to justify my imprisonment. Defense attorneys tried to paint the imprisonment as misguided family concern, But Morrison's cross-examination revealed the calculated nature of their planning. "Mr. Thornfield," Morrison addressed David, "you researched the probate process for incompetency declarations before imprisoning your mother, didn't you?" David's lawyer objected, but the judge allowed the question. "You contacted the bank about power of attorney procedures. You discussed property valuations with real estate agents. You planned to have your mother declared incompetent and institutionalized while liquidating her assets to pay your gambling debts." David's silence spoke volumes. Linda's testimony was a disaster. Under cross-examination, she admitted to fabricating medical concerns and using her nursing credentials to lend credibility to claims she knew were false. "Mrs. Caldwell, as a trained nurse, you knew the legal requirements for involuntary commitment of elderly patients? Yes? And you knew your mother met none of those criteria?" Linda's voice was barely audible. "Yes. Bobby's attorney didn't even put him on the stand. Knowing his client's temper and limited intelligence would only make things worse." Judge Hawkins delivered the verdicts with the gravity appropriate to such a betrayal. The defendants are found guilty on all counts. Elder abuse in the first degree carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years in state prison. David received 7 years due to his leadership role and the financial exploitation aspects. Bobby got 5 years with anger management requirements. Linda received 3 years with the possibility of supervised probation after 18 months, contingent on complete restitution and counseling. But the criminal convictions were only the beginning. Morrison immediately filed the civil judgment that would strip them of all inheritance rights and award Maggie additional damages for pain, suffering, and legal costs. Under Iowa Statute 633-262, conviction of elder abuse automatically disqualifies the defendants from any inheritance, Judge Hawkins ruled. Additionally, they are jointly liable for $150,000 in damages, restitution, and legal fees. As her children were led away in handcuffs, Maggie felt no satisfaction, only the hollow completion of necessary justice. Harold's farm, built through 40 years of backbreaking work, would be safe from their greed. Emma's education would be funded through a trust that honored family values rather than exploitation. Outside the courthouse, Morrison placed a gentle hand on Maggie's shoulder. "It's over. They can never threaten you again." Maggie nodded, watching the transport van disappear with her children inside. "Harold always said that actions have consequences. I just never imagined I'd have to teach that lesson to my own children." Emma approached hesitantly. "Grandma? What happens now?" Maggie looked at her granddaughter, the only family member who'd chosen integrity over greed, and managed a small smile. "Now we rebuild. The farm will be sold, but I'm keeping the house and 5 acres. There's room for you whenever you want to visit." "And the family?" "The family is whoever chooses to act like family," Maggie said quietly. "DNA doesn't guarantee loyalty, Emma, but love and respect do." As they walked away from the courthouse together, Maggie reflected on the price of justice. She'd won completely, but the victory felt like mourning. Her children had chosen money over love, greed over loyalty, and they would spend years in prison paying for that choice. Harold's legacy was safe. Emma's future was secure. And Margaret Thornfield had proven that wisdom and determination could triumph over betrayal and exploitation. The reckoning was complete. 6 months after the convictions, Maggie stood in the kitchen of her smaller home, a modest 2-bedroom house she'd built on the 5 acres she'd retained from Harold's farm. Through the window, she could see the construction crew putting finishing touches on the Margaret Thornfield Center for Elder Advocacy, funded by the sale of the remaining farmland. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her children's attempt to steal her legacy had instead transformed it into something that would protect other elderly victims for generations to come. Emma knocked on the door, her arms full of law school textbooks. At 20, she'd changed her major from social work to law, inspired by watching Morrison methodically destroy her family's conspiracy. "Grandma, I brought dinner from that new place in town. Come in, sweetheart. Maggie smiled, noting how much more mature Emma looked. The trial had aged them both, but in Emma's case, it had crystallized her sense of purpose. They ate together in comfortable silence before Emma finally broached the subject they'd both been avoiding. I got a letter from Mom yesterday. Maggie set down her fork carefully. How is she? She's in the halfway house in Des Moines. Says she's been going to counseling 3 times a week, and she got a job at a medical clinic. Just filing. Nothing that requires her nursing license. Emma's voice carried the careful neutrality of someone trying not to influence a difficult decision. She wants to know if she can write to you. Maggie had been dreading this conversation. Linda had been released after serving 18 months of her 3-year sentence, her cooperation with prosecutors and genuine remorse earning her early parole. But remorse didn't undo the fundamental betrayal of locking her own mother in a basement for money. What do you think I should do? Emma considered her words carefully. I think Mom genuinely understands what she did wrong. But I also think she made her choice when she decided your freedom was worth less than my college tuition. And what choice would you make? I'd rather pay my own way through law school than live with the guilt of what she did. Emma's voice carried the moral clarity of someone who'd watched family loyalty turn toxic. But she's still my mother, and you're still hers. I can't decide what forgiveness looks like for you. Through the window, Maggie could see James Morrison's car pulling into the driveway. Their monthly meetings had become a ritual. Partly business, partly the companionship of 2 people who'd survived a battle together. James, Maggie greeted him at the door. How are the Davidson brothers? Morrison's latest case involved 2 men in their 50s. Who'd isolated their 80-year-old father while systematically emptying his bank accounts. The precedent set by the Thornfield prosecution was proving invaluable in similar cases across the state. Convicted on all counts, the prosecutor said your case gave them the template for proving financial elder abuse. Morrison settled into Harold's old chair, which Maggie had moved to her new home. The Elder Advocacy Center is getting referrals from 3 counties now. The center had become Morrison's passion project in semi-retirement. Staffed by social workers, attorneys, and volunteers, it provided free legal assistance to elderly victims of family exploitation. The waiting list was longer than anyone had anticipated. Maggie, I have news about David. Her eldest son had been the hardest hit by the convictions. His gambling debts had followed him into prison, where his bookie's associates had managed to collect their payment in ways that left David with permanent injuries and a transfer to protective custody. He's being released next month. 5 years served. Eligible for parole. Maggie felt her stomach clench. Has he made any threats? None. According to his parole officer, prison broke him completely. He's been assigned to a halfway house in Cedar Rapids, required to attend Gamblers Anonymous, and prohibited from contacting you or Emma without court permission. And Bobby? Still has 2 years left. He's been in 3 fights, lost all his good time credits, and shows no sign of rehabilitation. Morrison's voice carried professional disappointment. Some people learn from consequences. Others just get angrier about being caught. Emma looked up from her textbooks. Mr. Morrison, do you think they'll try to contact Grandma when they get out? David might. He was always the manipulator of the family, and manipulators don't change easily. Bobby. Morrison shrugged. Bobby's dangerous in a different way. But the restraining orders are permanent, and any violation sends them back to prison immediately. That evening, after Morrison left and Emma returned to her dorm room, Maggie sat alone in her living room, surrounded by photographs of her. New life. Pictures of the Elder Advocacy Center's opening ceremony. Emma's law school acceptance letter framed on the wall. A newspaper clipping about her testimony before the state legislature on elder abuse prevention. The phone rang. Her secure landline that only a few people knew about. Mrs. Thornfield? This is Carol Peterson from the Cedar Rapids Halfway House. I'm calling about David Thornfield's upcoming release. Maggie's grip tightened on the receiver. Yes? He's requested permission to write you a letter. As his victim, you have the right to approve or deny any contact attempts. What would the letter say? He claims he wants to apologize and ask for forgiveness. But ma'am, I have to tell you, I've been doing this work for 15 years, and most of these apology letters are manipulations designed to restore contact so they can try again. Maggie closed her eyes, seeing David as a boy bringing her dandelions, then as a man installing a deadbolt on her basement prison. Denied. No contact, no letters, no third-party messages. Yes, ma'am. That's probably wise. After hanging up, Maggie walked to her bedroom and pulled out the box of letters she'd received since the trial. Hundreds of them, from elderly people across the country who'd survived similar abuse or feared they might become victims. Each one thanked her for having the courage to fight back publicly. One letter had arrived just that morning from an 80-year-old woman in Oregon whose daughter had been stealing her Social Security checks. Seeing your story on the news gave me the courage to call the police, she'd written. They arrested my daughter yesterday. Thank you for showing me that I didn't have to be ashamed of fighting back. Maggie smiled, understanding finally why. Harold had always said that good people leave the world better than they found it. Her children had tried to reduce her to a victim, a source of money to be exploited. Instead, their betrayal had transformed her into a symbol of resistance and dignity. The Advocacy Center bore her name, but its real monument was the growing network of elderly people who refused to accept abuse as the price of family loyalty. Justice wasn't just about punishing David, Linda, and Bobby. It was about preventing other families from making the same devastating choices. Outside her window, the lights of the Advocacy Center glowed in the darkness, staffed by volunteers who answered calls from frightened elderly people who'd found the courage to seek help. Harold would have been proud, not of what their children had become, but of what their betrayal had ultimately created. A legacy of protection that would outlast them all. Maggie turned off the lights and headed to bed, secure in her own home, surrounded by the consequences of choosing justice over family loyalty. Some prices were worth paying, and some battles were too important to lose. Her children had taught her that blood didn't guarantee love, but they'd also inadvertently taught hundreds of other families that dignity was worth defending at any cost. The lesson would outlive them all. 2 years after the trial, on a crisp October morning that reminded Maggie of the day her imprisonment began, she stood before the Iowa State Senate's Judiciary Committee, holding a folder of proposed legislation. At 74, she'd discovered a new calling that felt as natural as breathing, transforming her personal nightmare into systemic protection for others. Senators, my name is Margaret Thornfield, and I'm here to discuss Senate Bill 847, the Family Elder Protection Act. Her voice carried the same authority that had served her through 35 years as county clerk, but now it was tempered by hard-won wisdom about the depths of human betrayal. The committee room was packed with advocates, attorneys, and family, members whose stories echoed her own. In the front row sat Emma, now a second-year law student specializing in elder law, and Morrison, whose semi-retirement had evolved into full-time advocacy work. 2 years ago, my 3 adult children imprisoned me in the basement of my own home while attempting to steal my life savings and property. They fabricated evidence of mental decline, installed locks to keep me captive, and began legal proceedings to have me declared incompetent. She paused, letting the words settle. What happened to me happens to thousands of elderly Iowans every year, but most victims don't have the legal knowledge or resources to fight back. Senator Williams, the committee chair, leaned forward. Mrs. Thornfield, what specific changes are you proposing? Maggie opened her folder with the precision of someone who'd spent decades navigating bureaucracy. First, mandatory reporting requirements for financial institutions when family members attempt to access elderly accounts without proper documentation. Second, expedited court review for emergency protective orders in suspected elder abuse cases. Third, automatic forfeiture of inheritance rights upon conviction of elder abuse. No exceptions, no appeals. The inheritance provision seems harsh, Senator Martinez observed. What about rehabilitation and family reconciliation? Senator, would you ask that question if we were discussing child abuse? Maggie's response was immediate and sharp. Elder abuse is not a family dispute, it's a crime. When adult children decide their elderly parents are worth more to them dead than alive, rehabilitation becomes irrelevant. From the gallery, she could hear murmurs of agreement. The Advocacy Center had brought busloads of supporters, elderly, victims, their families, and social workers who dealt with the aftermath of financial elder abuse daily. Mrs. Thornfield, Senator Jackson interjected, some critics argue that your proposed legislation could criminalize legitimate family concerns about elderly relatives who genuinely need help. Senator, genuine concern doesn't require imprisoning someone in a basement. Legitimate family assistance doesn't involve fabricating medical evidence or installing locks to prevent escape. Maggie's voice carried the cold precision of someone who'd endured the difference firsthand. This legislation protects appropriate family involvement while criminalizing exploitation. Emma rose from the front row when called to testify. At 21, she projected the confident competence of someone who'd learned early that family loyalty meant protecting the vulnerable, not exploiting them. My name is Emma Caldwell, and my mother, aunt, and uncle imprisoned my grandmother for money. The directness of her statement rippled through the committee room. I called 911 because my social work training taught me to recognize abuse. But most families don't have someone with that background. Most elderly victims suffer in silence because they're ashamed their own children would betray them. Ms. Caldwell, how has this experience affected your family relationships? Emma's response was measured but firm. It taught me that family isn't defined by DNA. It's defined by actions. My grandmother raised 3 children who chose greed over love, but she also raised me to understand that integrity matters more than convenience. Morrison testified about the legal complexities that allowed elder abuse to flourish. Current statutes have loopholes you could drive a truck through. Financial institutions aren't required to report suspicious activity by family members. Courts can take weeks to review protective orders while victims remain imprisoned. And inheritance laws don't adequately address the perverse incentive created when elderly parents become more valuable dead than alive. But it was the parade of victims that provided the most compelling testimony. Sarah Chen had brought case files from across the state. Dozens of elderly people whose children had isolated, exploited, or imprisoned them while systematically stealing their assets. Mrs. Patterson, now 86, testified with the help of a walker. My son moved me to his basement, said it was temporary while he renovated my house. That was 8 months ago. He's been collecting my Social Security and pension. Checks ever since. I finally escaped when a neighbor called Adult Protective Services. Mr. Rodriguez, a Vietnam veteran, spoke about his daughter who'd gained power of attorney through forged documents. She sold my house, emptied my bank accounts, and had me committed to a nursing home against my will. I lost everything I'd worked 60 years to build. The pattern was consistent. Adult children facing financial crises who viewed their elderly parents as solutions rather than people. The current legal system was too slow, too complex, and too forgiving to provide adequate protection. Senators? Maggie concluded her testimony. Every month my case remains an anomaly instead of a precedent. More elderly Iowans will die in captivity while their children auction off their dignity. This legislation isn't harsh. It's necessary. The committee voted unanimously to advance the bill to the full Senate. As the hearing concluded, Maggie was surrounded by advocates and victims who'd found their voices through her example. Mrs. Thornfield, a reporter called out, do you have any regrets about pursuing criminal charges against your own children? Maggie paused, considering the question that had haunted her for 2 years. I regret that I raised children capable of such betrayal, but I don't regret holding them accountable for it. Justice isn't a family decision. It's a societal obligation. That evening, back in her small home, Maggie sat at the kitchen table reading letters from across the country. The Advocacy Center now coordinated with similar organizations in 12 states, and her legislative model was being introduced in 6 others. Emma arrived with dinner and law school updates. "Grandma, Professor Chen says my paper on elder abuse precedents is good enough to publish." "Your mother called the center today," Maggie said quietly. "She wanted to know if you'd accept a graduation gift." Emma looked up from her books. "What did you tell them?" "That they should ask you directly. I'm not the guardian of your relationship with Linda anymore." "What do you think I should do?" Maggie studied her granddaughter's face, seeing Harold's integrity and her own determination reflected there. "I think you should do whatever allows you to sleep peacefully at night. I chose justice over family reconciliation because I couldn't live with myself if other elderly people suffered while I prioritized my own comfort. And if Mom really has changed, then she'll understand why her actions have consequences, and she won't ask you to pretend they don't." Maggie's voice carried the wisdom of someone who'd learned to distinguish between genuine remorse and manipulative apology. Real change doesn't demand forgiveness. It earns it through consistent actions over time. Emma nodded, understanding the difference. Her mother's 18 months in prison and ongoing probation were consequences, not punishments designed to be forgiven away. The phone rang. Another call from an elderly victim who'd found the courage to seek help. Maggie answered with the patience of someone who understood that survival sometimes required strangers to provide the support that family had failed to offer. As she listened to another story of betrayal and exploitation, Maggie reflected on the unexpected gift her children had given her. Their attempt to reduce her to a helpless victim had instead revealed her capacity to become a protector of others. Harold's farm was gone, sold to fund the Advocacy Center. Her children's inheritance had been forfeited to pay restitution and legal fees. But what remained was more valuable than money: a legacy of resistance that would protect elderly people long after Maggie was gone. Outside her window, the lights of the Advocacy Center glowed against the darkness, staffed by volunteers who answered calls from people who'd learned that family loyalty was a two-way street, not a blank check for exploitation. Her children had taught her that blood didn't guarantee love, but they'd also taught her that love, real love, meant protecting people from exactly the kind of betrayal they'd inflicted. The lesson would outlive them all, carved into law and carried forward by people like Emma, who understood that justice wasn't the enemy of family. It was the foundation upon which healthy families were built. Some victories were measured in vindication. Others were measured in prevention. This one would be measured in the elderly people who would never experience what she'd endured, because her children's betrayal had become their protection. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.